I think they're trying to destroy America.
Let's listen to more accusations before trying to understand who they are.
And keep in mind, my husband is infamous, Princeton graduate, chief of staff for Al Gray, who runs all the dirty tricks for the Army. You know, Linda Tripp worked for Carl Steiner, who was a partner of, you know, Jim Joy and Carl Steiner and my husband were the triumvirate in Beirut.
Okay.
And Linda Tripp worked for Carl Steiner down there.
This would be approximately
In the, I think in the 80s. She and her husband were both Delta Force duos. They send them, but then they divorced, so that broke up that. But she's a dirty tricks person, Linda.
She believes that Linda Tripp was helping to set President Clinton up for blackmail. She also claims that the U.S. military was manipulated during the 1991 Iraqi war for purposes of selling weapons, smuggling drugs, and laundering money.
It's kind of like Monica and Bill. I think they put Monica in there to have something on Bill. That's my own feeling. Sarah McClendon feels the same way. Because...
And Linda Tripp was there to guide the situation.
Absolutely. Of course. Linda Tripp was Delta Force. Linda Tripp was trained by Carl Steiner, who's in the diary with my husband. Carl Steiner is called a snake. And he tried to trip up Schwarzkopf. I mean, he was trying to take the whole Iraqi thing over because they had been baiting, you know, using the Israeli rogues in Turkey. They were having little zigzag wars. It's all to sell weapons. It's all about weapon sales. It's all about drugs. It's all about funny money.
Most people assume that the U.S. military wanted the Vietnam War, but she claims that the military was pushed into Vietnam by the same group who were behind the bombing of Dresden during World War II. She supports the accusation that the American military was fooled into bombing Dresden simply to slaughter the German civilians. She also supports the accusation in Michael Piper's book, Final Judgment, that some Israelis were the masterminds of the President Kennedy assassination.
You didn't used to kill women and children in war when the British Army, when they were pure kind of, you didn't go out and kill. I think Dresden, they did do some of that, but that was Walt Whitman Rostow and his crowd. And he's a very dangerous man, because Walt Whitman Rostow is a communist.
Okay, and in what capacity is he?
Oh, he was one of the wise men in Kennedy's administration. I think he was probably responsible for the movement that got Kennedy murdered. I believe it was an Israeli group which did it with some of these rogues. Walt Whitman Rostow was the one who got us into the Vietnam War because he wanted to sell the weapons and stuff. He and Victor Krulak, who is the present commandant's father, Krulak was his lackey. Walt Whitman Rostow's lackey. Walt Whitman Rostow went with Taylor, General Taylor, and wrote the report that got us into the Vietnam War. And all the time that the Pentagon was saying, no, 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 he was a cheerleader for the weapons sales. He and Henry Kissinger. Right. He and Henry. Walt Whitman Rostow, Eugene Debs Rostow, these were communists, named for communists. Eugene Debs Rostow and it's either his son or his other brother, runs the big Boston mob, the port there. His name is Nicholas Rostow.
She claims that the war in Bosnia was also manipulated by these people, and that the CIA is not as important as we assume it is. She believes that most of the secret operations are coming from a group of criminals working within our military and NATO. Sometimes she refers to them as the Joint.
The war in Bosnia is simply a stage to train assassins, to be a market for brand new weapons, to be a marketplace so that the drug money can be used. And the Army runs the whole show. It's totally run by the Army. The CIA is a bogus thing. You know, it's Training and Doctrine Command. It's NATO. It's SHAPE. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, started by Eisenhower. It's a totally independent corporation. Its main function is to sell weapons and launder money.
You're talking about CIA?
No,
No,
I'm talking
no.
about SHAPE.
SHAPE. Okay.
CIA is kind of bogus. I mean,
That's
it's
just
there.
a trade name for the media
Oh, it's to
to
confuse
use.
us. It's just to get us off the track. It's all being done by Army people who are now joint.
She describes the Joint as being in New York and that it acts as a funding organization for their criminal activities.
The funding organization, one of the funding organizations was out of New York, and it was called the Joint. And Meyer Lansky, see, our mob, the organized crime, the Jewish Kabbalist group.
Unlike the gangsters of Al Capone's era, Meyer Lansky and his friends can manipulate entire nations rather than just a few cities. In this next segment, she mentions that one of the operations that the Joint was funding was the illegal immigration of Nazis into America. Since she describes the Joint as being Jewish, your first thought might be to assume that they were helping Jews escape Nazi Germany. However, what she describes may be what other people refer to as Operation Paperclip, although she does not use that expression. She is going to mention that many of these Nazis had the German disease, and she refers to them as the Pink Triangle Boys. She is referring to homosexuality and sex with children. The Nazi Party had the same problem that the Republican Party suffers from. Specifically, there are a lot of accusations that many top Nazi and Republican leaders are homosexual, that some are raping children on a regular basis, and that some are covering up the slave trade. In Nazi Germany, some of the rapists and homosexuals were arrested and put into prison camps, and pink triangles were put on their uniforms to identify them from the other prisoners. She believes that thousands of these Pink Triangle Boys were brought to America at the end of World War II. She also claims that the Nazi government was brought down by the German people when reports about the raping of children started spreading through the population. This seems to be happening right now with the Bush administration. The Jeff Gannon incident seems to be forcing a lot of people to face the possibility that many top government officials are not what they claim to be.
This funding group in New York, they would pay for passports which